The story of Kansas is, every time I look at this, I remember being on the Dylan Ratigan program. I guess, I don't know how many years ago that was now, 3 years ago. Maybe it was even 4, when Ratigan said had posed a question to the panel, which was, we have a unique opportunity because we see Europe go all in on austerity policies, and we are ostensibly not engaged in that. I'm not sure I agreed with that assessment. It was a matter of degree. But nevertheless, he said, let's reconvene in a year to see how the European austerity policies are working, to see if that's the right course to take. And yes, let's. And in fact, the show had not been canceled before that year had passed. And I kept saying to Ratigan on and off air, when are we going to do this? And I would say on air, I kept citing that, and we never did. Well, we had a similar dynamic with Kansas in 2012. In Kansas, the newly elected governor, and I think he was probably elected in 2010, actually, I believe it was. But in 2012, Kansas Governor Sam Brownback signed into law in Kansas a massive tax cut. It essentially got rid of all taxes on anyone who had set up any type of pass-through. In other words, an S-corp or an LLC, something that you would form if you were creating a small business. It also dropped the tax rates on the wealthiest people in the state, slashing income taxes. Now, at the time in Kansas, they had a budget surplus, which I think had grown as a function of, increased tax revenues, imagine property taxes and whatnot, prior to him being elected. I think this was under a Democratic governor. Nevertheless, at the time, like I say, Kansas had a huge surplus. Well, now understand too that Brownback was advised throughout this process by Arthur Laffer. Arthur Laffer is the guy who came up with the Laffer curve. And anytime you hear the Republicans say, if we cut taxes, we will raise revenue, it is based on this concept that Laffer had, that when you tax people, you start to get diminishing returns on what their output will be, their productivity. Businesses will not seek to make as much money. Because if every dollar over, say, $500,000 or $250,000, and same with individuals, is taxed incrementally more, their incentive to make money will be diminished. And yes, it is masturbatory, as Michael is suggesting, non-verbally. So the theory was at the time, we're going to cut taxes. And we're going to see an explosion of revenues because new businesses will come here. The makers will make more money. And all of this will lead to huge burgeoning economic activity. Well, after these tax cuts, the results are now in. Despite the fact that this bill was to create 23,000 new jobs by 2020, would lead more than 35,000 people to move to Kansas, the state general fund revenue is now down over $700 million. It is a huge chunk of the state's $6 billion budget. There have been extensive cuts to education. The state's bond rating has now been dropped by Moody's. Kansas's job growth has lagged behind the rest of the country, especially in the years following the first round of Brownback's tax cuts. You haven't had this massive migration to Kansas. In fact, none of what was predicted for Kansas has happened except for the massive shortfall in their budget, and they are digging into that surplus. Their employment statistics with those of the 6 neighboring states have lagged. Colorado's jobs up 8.2%. It is now worse in Kansas in terms of job growth than it was following the recession, directly following it.
That's stunning.
Yes.
I mean, that is like, how far do you have to go out of your way to get that stat?
Yes, it is. It has been horrible for Kansas, and hopefully equally horrible for Sam Brownback, as he is statistically, or at least in terms of the polls, starting to lose against his Democratic challenger. Now, one would imagine he's going to raise a lot of money from all the extra tax windfall that the one percenters have. He has boasted of 16,000 new small businesses that have been created, without mentioning the 18,000 that have closed. Unbelievable. And of course, he is also not showing Kansas residents the full implications of what happens when you cut taxes for people in terms of revenues, because he's dipping into the surpluses to fund a lot of the stuff, except, of course, education. Understand, too, the difference with a state versus a country is that the state does not issue their own currency. And in Kansas, you have to balance the budget. This is only going to get worse as this law continues to cut taxes. But let this be for the country. There should be far more talk of this. Let this be a lesson for the country and for those libertarians and Tea Partiers and all of them who think that cutting taxes will suddenly spur economic growth and suddenly spur more tax revenue. Because all of the new businesses will mean that there's a bigger pie from which to drive revenues. This is silliness. Businesses hire and businesses expand when demand increases. Period. Period. And if you want to call the program as we head into the better half of the program, 646-257-3920 is the number, where you can explain to me how this data is irrelevant and to all of your economic models say this shouldn't happen.